Welcome to POV, Planning and Organizational Visioning, bringing you insights from experts in planning, sustainability, and organizational management. I'm your host, James Rouse. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of POV. It's been a few months since our last podcast, for a couple of reasons. It was a little difficult scheduling during the holidays, which I hope everyone had a great holiday season. And secondly, I've been recovering from a slightly severe injury, and we have all woken up to a health crisis. It is March and the end of March, and we are in the middle of the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis. This episode of POV is going to be a little different. I will not be interviewing anyone as we are all in quarantine, at least here in New York City, New York State, as well as around most of the country. So today I'm going to primarily give my insight and opinion on leadership during this crisis. There has been a lot of information out there and a lot of disinformation, and for a lot of folks, there's a lack of clarity in the information being shared. There have been a few leaders out there that have been more present than others, both due to their stature as well as their geography in terms of where the crisis has been hitting the most. Today I'm going to be looking at different styles of leadership and leadership types. Now keep in mind that this podcast is my opinion and my observation. It's not going to be too overly technical in terms of leadership and organizational management terms, and it will try to be as objective as possible, but given that this is insight and opinion, subjectivity will seep in at some point. So if you're listening and thinking, hey, why is he saying X, Y, and Z about this person? Remember that this is just subjective. I will try to be as objective as possible, but I'm doing this just to give my 2 cents on how folks are handling the crisis, depending on where it is and what population it's serving. Given that, looking at the leadership in the United States where it's been most visible in terms, at least, from a New York standpoint, but I think really a national standpoint as well, it's really a handful of people that have been out there and that we've really heard from, but given the impact on the population and given just the natural stature of some of these positions, the folks who I think have been out there the most and in the papers, on television, have been a handful of governors, mayors, and of course Donald Trump. So I will be focusing my attention on Governors Andrew Cuomo, Jay Inslee, Gavin Newsom, and Phil Murphy, as well as Mayor Bill de Blasio and Donald Trump, of course. I'm not really going to put too much energy in looking at other countries, China, Italy, South Korea, and how they've been handling it. I really want to focus on how it's impacted our daily lives within the political structure and the political system that we operate in. Given that, I'm going to start with the person who's probably been the most visible during this entire crisis, and that's Governor Andrew Cuomo. One might say Donald Trump has been the most visible person, but really in terms of action and credit, Governor Cuomo throughout the United States has really been acknowledged as a real leader throughout this crisis. Governor Cuomo has a very strong management style. It's very top-down in a lot of ways. He has a very assertive, strong personality. He's a person who likes to get things done. He builds fairly strong teams around him that are extremely active, that will jump when he says jump. And for a crisis like this, a management style like that is important. In terms of what I've set out in terms of my own leadership style and what I've studied, I prefer to take a more holistic, collaborative approach. And while that's great in a lot of situations, in times of crisis, a certain type of personality usually steps forward. You do have the more caretaker, the more empathetic type of leader, who I would characterize at times here and there, Governor Phil Murphy. but has been characteristic with Governor Cuomo as well. But the aspect that really is catapulting Governor Cuomo into the spotlight is his mix of empathy during this crisis with decisiveness. And I would lean more on the decisiveness aspect because that's more his natural management style. He wants certain things done. He has a certain opinion about things. He can be swayed by his opinion, but you better really have a good argument in order to sway that opinion, and you better act on it and have a plan and move quick on it. In my experience working in New York State and working on New York State projects, that is the governor at his core. He really is looking for checkboxing a lot of accomplishments, looking at a problem and tackling it at no matter what cost. He has been strong in terms of developing infrastructure, getting projects done, moving the state more towards a design-build model. And while it's been very effective, that type of leadership on the day-to-day basis has rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, saying that it's too top-down, it's too insular, it's too controlled, there's an old boy network going on. And while a lot of that may or may not be true, that kind of management style is useful when it comes to crises like this. While you may not like how he speaks or treats people in a normal situation, the clear, decisive nature of his message is really important because folks don't know exactly what's happening at the moment. This is something we have never experienced in the United States, let alone the entire world, in many years, where it's pandemic levels of concern in terms of health. And what is really needed is someone there to be a guiding light through this. And the tone that the Governor Cuomo has taken has been one of decisiveness and assertiveness, but it has not been combative for the most part. In his dealings with Donald Trump, you don't hear a lot of attack words. You don't see a lot of combativeness. And while there's a lot of folks who would like to see that, who really desire that because they don't like Donald Trump or do not appreciate his leadership or lack thereof, it's a double-edged sword in terms of doing that. You'll have those people who criticize it, but he has been fairly direct in terms of criticizing the federal government without getting personal. And what that has done is that it's created a fair enough balance in terms of the state receiving resources from the federal government and attention from the federal government. There's not an overly inherent battle type of nature, confrontational type of nature taking place between the governor and Donald Trump. Sure, it's there. Sure, there's been bickering, but in terms of keeping resources, he said, she said kind of language, it's been at a comparative minimum, which has been a welcome surprise. The reason that this type of style works in a crisis is that, as I was mentioning, people are unsure, people are uncertain, and there needs to be a guiding light. And so people need to be tasked to do things. New York has grown to be the largest epicenter in the United States in terms of cases. Part of that, and it's a valid statement, the governor has said through the increased amount of testing and the contingency in terms of looking for options where need be to address the crisis if it's not being addressed within municipalities, by the federal government, by private industry. And so I think the flexibility has been important in terms of how the governor has approached it, but also, again, even with the decisiveness, there has been a level of compassion that we're actually not used to seeing Governor Cuomo express on a regular basis. And I think that's one reason why people have been flocking to him in terms of what do we do? How do we get through this? As far as other governors go, and I want to stay on the governor level at the moment, The first state to be hit with this crisis on a large scale was Washington State. Governor Jay Inslee and his team and the state in general were inundated in the Seattle area with cases. And this was very early on when we knew it was impacting other countries, but we were still wondering, will this impact the United States and how will it impact the United States? And when the Seattle metro area was hit very hard, including the realization that it will hit assisted living facilities, nursing homes, and our senior population really hard, people seriously reacted. Now, I have not been following Washington State too closely, and I wasn't there during this crisis, but just given the news that I've read, the opinions I've read on social media, there was an initial outrage at the governor, and that was stemmed around the lack of decisiveness and the lack of guidance as what to do. In fairness, as a country have not really dealt with this in a century's time in terms of the severity of a pandemic and a health crisis. It's understandable that even our leadership at its best would not know exactly what to do. But the sentiment was that we were moving too slow. Why isn't Washington State handling this? What's going to happen? What's the message that's out there? And I really think that's where it's been a hit or miss type of approach to leadership. The governor seemingly, as I said, this is having not followed it too closely and just listening to a lot of opinion, the governor seemed to not act quickly enough and convey the message clearly enough. Communication is key. And what happens in government a lot is that when you're not sure of how to proceed, you tend to keep information to yourself because you don't want to look foolish as a leader, or you don't want to give misinformation, so sometimes you'll hoard information a little too much and not let it trickle out in terms of giving people that confidence that things are going to be okay, that we're not sure what this is, we're looking into it, there's a plan of action. I think Washington State has gotten on board in the last week or two in terms of quelling concerns. There seems to be a slight flattening out in terms of new cases, but it was a real misstep early on, it appears, in terms of calming the populace and really understanding what was going on early in the crisis. The next person I'd like to talk about is California Governor Gavin Newsom. I was actually in California when a lot of the hard decisions were being made. I was at the airport the day the NBA decided to shut down, and then it was kind of a domino effect after that. For the next 6 days, it was new information as it came, and there was real uncertainty about what it all meant. While I was in California, it was really interesting because it seemed like another world. It seemed like there were things happening around us, but not really impacting us directly. So it was really tough to gauge what was going on. I was in the Sierra Nevada mountains, so it was a little more isolated, even though I was in a populated area for the most part. But when decisions started being made in Washington State, in the federal government, and even in the state of California, the message didn't seem to get out that this is serious. The feeling and what I saw in the Sierras, the Lake Tahoe area, was that I'm worried. What's this going to be? But I'm not going to stop my day-to-day activities or day-to-day business. Why would we do that? Look at the numbers. This is not a lot. It's mostly happening in Washington State. Oh, look, a few in San Francisco, a few in New York. This isn't a huge deal. And while what I saw from the governor on TV was a clear message as far as I was concerned that the state was seriously looking into it and we have to make some hard decisions, I don't think the message was tailored to Californians in a way that was digestible. So it was really it was really hard to gauge